At first, my husband's sudden care felt like a blessing I had quietly prayed for over many lonely nights. It arrived without warning, like warm sunlight after a long, cold season, and I welcomed it with an open heart. He began to notice me in ways he never had before. His voice softened when he spoke my name, his eyes lingered on my face as if he were seeing me anew, and his hands, once distant and indifferent, found reasons to hold mine. For years I had lived beside a man who felt emotionally miles away, so when this change came, I told myself this was what love returning looked like. I convinced myself that marriages go through dry seasons and that perhaps we had finally crossed ours. He woke up earlier than usual just to prepare breakfast, something he had never done in all our years together. He asked how I slept, whether I felt tired, whether my body ached or my heart felt heavy. These questions felt intimate, almost sacred, because no one had asked them with genuine interest in such a long time. When I spoke, he listened, or at least he appeared to. He nodded, smiled, and reassured me that I mattered. Each small act felt like a thread carefully stitching my broken expectations back together. I felt seen, cherished, and oddly important again. Friends noticed the change before I did. They smiled knowingly and said, "He must really love you." And I smiled back, proud and relieved. I defended him whenever someone hinted that sudden change could mean something else. I told them people can grow, people can realize their mistakes, and love can awaken even after years of neglect. Deep down, I wanted that to be true more than anything. I wanted to believe my patience had finally been rewarded. His care wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, deliberate, and consistent. He sent messages during the day asking if I had eaten. He brought small gifts home, not expensive, but thoughtful enough to make me feel remembered. He apologized for old arguments, admitted he had taken me for granted, and promised he would do better. Those words wrapped around my wounded heart like a healing balm. I cried the night he said them, not out of sadness, but out of relief. I believed we were finally becoming what we were meant to be. In my vulnerability, I allowed myself to dream again. I imagined growing old together with laughter replacing silence. I imagined trust rebuilding itself brick by brick. I even blamed myself for the years of distance, thinking perhaps I hadn't been patient enough or understanding enough. His sudden care made me reframe the past in kinder ways, convincing myself that love had always been there, just buried under stress and misunderstanding. What I didn't realize then was how deeply I wanted this version of him to be real. That desire blinded me. Every loving gesture felt like proof, every kind word like confirmation. I ignored the faint unease that sometimes crept in when his phone buzzed and he turned it face down, or when his affection felt perfectly timed, almost scheduled. I dismissed those moments as my own insecurity, scars left behind by years of emotional neglect. There was a softness in him that felt unfamiliar, and instead of questioning it, I embraced it. I told myself this was growth, that perhaps a man can wake up one day and choose to love fully. I replayed his words in my mind at night, holding on to them like promises written in stone. I felt chosen again, and that feeling is dangerously powerful when you have spent years feeling invisible. His care gave me hope, and hope can be intoxicating. It makes you rewrite reality to protect the dream you finally allowed yourself to have. I trusted him because trusting felt easier than doubting. Doubt would have meant questioning every smile, every touch, every apology. Trust, on the other hand, allowed me to rest, and I was so tired of being strong, so tired of being cautious, that I let myself rest in his sudden kindness. I began to open parts of myself I had long kept guarded. I shared my fears, my regrets, the silent pain I carried. He listened, sometimes holding me as I spoke, and I mistook his silence for empathy. I didn't know then that listening doesn't always mean caring, and attention doesn't always mean love, but in that moment, his presence felt like safety, and I surrendered to it completely. Looking back, I understand that sudden care can feel like redemption when you are starving for affection. It feels like proof that love was never lost, only delayed. At that time, I saw his actions as courage, him finally stepping up, finally choosing us. I had no idea that care can sometimes be a disguise, carefully worn to hide guilt or fear. But in those early days, before the truth cast its shadow, his sudden attention felt pure to me. It felt like love finding its way home, and I held on to it with everything I had, unaware that the very thing giving me comfort would soon become the source of my deepest pain. I trusted that care without question, because questioning it would have meant questioning everything I had hoped for. When someone finally gives you the attention you have been silently begging for, you don't inspect it for cracks. You embrace it as a miracle. His kindness felt overdue, like a debt he was finally paying back, and I accepted it with gratitude instead of caution. I told myself that love does not always arrive on time, but when it does, it deserves faith. So I gave him mine freely, never imagining that trust itself could become the weapon used against me. There was a comfort in believing him. It allowed me to stop bracing myself for disappointment and start imagining a future that felt warm instead of uncertain. I leaned into his words, his reassurances, his promises of change, letting them soothe parts of me that had been aching for years. Every affectionate gesture felt like evidence that he had finally chosen me, that whatever distance once existed between us had been erased. I told myself that doubting him would be unfair, even ungrateful, and so I silenced the small voice inside me that whispered caution. I didn't consider that kindness could be strategic. I had always believed deception looked cruel, cold, or careless, not tender and attentive. The idea that someone could hide wrongdoing behind affection felt foreign to me. Love, in my mind, was honest by nature. It didn't occur to me that affection could be rehearsed, that care could be measured and delivered with purpose rather than feeling. I mistook consistency for sincerity, never realizing that even patterns can be carefully constructed. There were moments, small and fleeting, when something felt slightly off. His concern sometimes arrived before I even voiced a need, almost as if he were anticipating rather than responding. At times, his affection felt urgent, like he was trying to cover ground too quickly, but each time doubt surfaced, I pushed it away. I blamed my past hurts, my insecurities, my tendency to overthink. I told myself that not every good thing needs to be interrogated, and that love cannot grow under constant suspicion. Trusting him also meant trusting my own judgment. Admitting that something might be wrong would have meant admitting that I had misread the man I had built my life with. That idea frightened me more than betrayal itself, so I chose belief. I chose the version of reality where his care was genuine and his intentions were pure. I told myself that marriage requires faith, and faith means standing firm even when uncertainty tries to creep in. I defended him not just to others, but to myself. When friends questioned his sudden transformation, I felt protective, almost defensive. I spoke of growth, of realization, of love maturing with time. I didn't want their skepticism to poison my hope. I needed this change to be real, because the alternative was too painful to face. I had already endured years of emotional distance. I didn't think I could survive discovering that this newfound closeness was built on a lie. What I didn't understand then was how easily trust can be manipulated when it's given without boundaries. By trusting him blindly, I handed him the power to control the narrative of our relationship. His explanations went unchallenged, his absences unquestioned, his inconsistencies smoothed over by my willingness to believe the best. I became complicit in my own deception, stitching together excuses on his behalf before he even had to ask. I allowed his care to rewrite my instincts. Where once I might have noticed changes in his behavior, now I interpreted them as effort. Where once I might have sensed emotional distance, I now saw thoughtfulness. My inner compass slowly shifted, pointing not toward truth, but toward comfort. I wanted peace more than clarity, reassurance more than honesty, and so I accepted what he showed me at face value, never thinking to look behind the curtain. Trust also softened my guard. I shared more of myself, exposing vulnerabilities I had long kept hidden. I spoke of my fears of abandonment, my need for reassurance, my longing to feel chosen. In doing so, I unknowingly gave him the very tools needed to perfect his disguise. He learned exactly how to comfort me, how to silence my doubts, how to appear devoted at the precise moments when suspicion might have arisen. I didn't realize that my honesty was feeding his deception. There is a cruel irony in how trust works. It is meant to build connection, yet in the wrong hands it becomes a cover for betrayal. At the time, I saw trust as loyalty, as strength, as proof of love. I didn't see how fragile it was, or how easily it could be exploited by someone determined to hide the truth. I believed that love and lies could not coexist, never imagining that the warmth I felt was carefully designed to distract me from the cold reality beneath it. By the time I would eventually understand what his care truly was, my trust had already been deeply invested. It had shaped my decisions, my emotions, and my understanding of our marriage. In those early days, I trusted without question because I wanted to believe in redemption, in transformation, in love that chooses to stay. I didn't know then that sometimes unquestioned trust is not a virtue. It is the door through which betrayal quietly enters, smiling, gentle, and devastatingly convincing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, small details began to disturb my peace. They didn't arrive as loud warnings or obvious red flags. They came as whispers, easily dismissed if you weren't listening carefully. At first, it was just a feeling, an unease I couldn't quite name. Everything on the surface looked perfect. His care was consistent, his affection steady, and yet somewhere deep inside me, something felt misaligned. I told myself that healing after years of emotional distance would naturally feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. I convinced myself that discomfort didn't always mean danger. His routine began to change in subtle ways. He started leaving the house earlier than usual and returning later, always with reasonable explanations. Work had become demanding, projects were piling up, meetings were running long. He spoke with confidence, offering details before I even asked, and that alone should have warned me. But I was still living in the comfort of trust, so I accepted his words without hesitation. I admired his dedication, believing it was another sign of responsibility and growth. There were moments when his phone seemed to command more of his attention than I did. Messages would light up the screen, and he would smile faintly before quickly locking it. If I entered the room, he would tilt the screen away, casually, almost naturally, as if it were a habit he had always had. When I asked who it was, he answered easily, never defensive, never shaken. I told myself privacy is not secrecy, and everyone deserves space. I didn't want to become the suspicious wife who interrogates every vibration of a phone. His affection, though frequent, sometimes felt strangely precise. He knew exactly when to be kind, when to be attentive, when to show concern. It was as if his love followed a schedule rather than a feeling. On days when I seemed distracted or quiet, he suddenly became extra caring, offering reassurance before I had even voiced a worry. Instead of questioning this, I felt grateful. I saw it as emotional intelligence, not calculation. I didn't yet understand that guilt often sharpens awareness in unsettling ways. There were also silences that felt heavier than before. He listened, but sometimes his eyes seemed elsewhere, his thoughts drifting even as his hands held mine. I noticed it during conversations when his responses came a second too late, as if he had to pull himself back into the moment. When I paused mid-sentence, he would smile and nod, pretending he had caught every word. I told myself everyone gets tired, everyone gets lost in thought. I refused to let these moments grow teeth. The smallest inconsistencies began to appear in his stories, a detail here, a time there, nothing dramatic, nothing easily provable. But my memory held onto them, quietly stacking one on top of another. When I asked gentle questions, he answered smoothly, sometimes correcting himself with a laugh. I laughed too, embarrassed that I had even noticed. I didn't want to believe that the man who held me at night could also be someone I needed to fact-check. Emotionally, I felt a strange tension between comfort and alertness. I was happy, yet constantly aware, like someone enjoying a beautiful view while standing on uncertain ground. I noticed how quickly he reassured me whenever I seemed thoughtful or distant, almost as if he feared my silence more than my words. His care intensified whenever my intuition stirred, and each time, that attention pushed my doubts back into the shadows. I began questioning myself instead of him. I wondered if years of emotional neglect had damaged my ability to trust peace. Maybe I had grown so used to disappointment that calm felt suspicious. Maybe this was what healing felt like, awkward, uneven, unfamiliar. I told myself not to sabotage something good with unfounded fears. I reminded myself that love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability means risking misunderstanding. Still, the feeling lingered. It showed up in quiet moments late at night when his breathing slowed and sleep claimed him. I would lie awake, replaying conversations, expressions, and moments that didn't quite fit. Not because I was searching for proof, but because my heart was trying to tell me something my mind wasn't ready to hear. I pushed those thoughts aside, convincing myself that love means choosing faith, even when clarity is incomplete. I noticed changes in myself too. I became more observant, more sensitive to shifts in energy. I caught myself watching his reactions, listening between words, reading pauses. I didn't like this version of me. It felt intrusive, insecure, and unfamiliar. So whenever awareness sharpened, I softened it with excuses. I didn't want suspicion to poison what I believed was a second chance at happiness. There was a quiet loneliness hidden beneath his care. Even when he was present, I sometimes felt alone, as if a part of him remained just out of reach. His touch reassured my body, but my spirit sensed a distance it couldn't explain. I told myself intimacy grows in layers, and perhaps we just hadn't reached the deepest one yet. I clung to that hope, because the alternative felt too painful to consider. Those small disturbances never screamed. They waited patiently, building pressure beneath the surface of my peace. At the time, I didn't recognize them as warnings. I saw them as imperfections in an otherwise beautiful change. I believed that love doesn't come without flaws, and I was willing to overlook a few shadows for the sake of the light. I didn't know then that intuition doesn't shout when it's ignored. It waits quietly until the truth finally demands to be seen. The day the truth surfaced did not arrive with drama or warning. It came quietly, almost respectfully, as if it knew how fragile I already was. There was no grand confrontation at first, no shouting or accusations. It began with a moment so ordinary that I almost missed its importance. A misplaced phone, an unanswered call, a hesitation that lasted just a second too long. That second cracked something open inside me, and for the first time, I didn't push the feeling away. I followed it. What I discovered didn't feel real at first. My mind refused to accept it, rearranging the facts into something less painful, something that could still fit the story I had been telling myself. I reread messages, replayed conversations, and searched desperately for an explanation that didn't end in betrayal. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from disbelief. This couldn't be the same man who held me when I cried, who promised change, who wrapped his care around me so convincingly. When I finally confronted him, his silence said more than any confession could have. The warmth in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a look I had never seen before, calculating, cornered, exposed. He didn't deny it right away. He tried to soften the blow with half-truths, with excuses carefully chosen to sound reasonable. He spoke of confusion, of mistakes, of things just happening. Each word felt like a knife turning slowly in my chest. As the truth unfolded piece by piece, it felt less like learning something new and more like watching my entire past rearrange itself. Moments I had cherished suddenly changed shape. His sudden care, his perfectly timed affection, his attentiveness, it all shifted meaning. What I once believed was love now revealed itself as camouflage. The realization hit me with brutal clarity. His kindness was never about me. It was about hiding what he had done. The pain was physical. My chest tightened, my breathing grew shallow, and my body reacted as if it were under attack. I felt dizzy, unsteady, as though the ground beneath my life had vanished. Trust doesn't break cleanly, it splinters, embedding itself into every memory, every hope, every plan you ever made. In that moment, I didn't just lose faith in him. I lost faith in my own judgment. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to understand how he could look into my eyes every day and lie so effortlessly. But my voice failed me. Shock wrapped itself around my throat, silencing words I didn't yet know how to speak. Instead, I listened as he explained, minimized, justified. Each attempt to lessen his guilt deepened my pain. He spoke as if betrayal were an accident, something that happened to him rather than a choice he made. What hurt most was realizing how carefully he had protected the lie. He had watched me open my heart again, watched me believe, watched me heal, all while knowing the truth would eventually destroy me. That awareness felt cruel beyond measure. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the prolonged deception, the calculated performance of care that turned love into manipulation. My mind raced backward, revisiting every suspicious moment I had ignored. The phone turned away, the unexplained absences, the urgency in his affection. Each memory clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to complete. The picture they formed was devastatingly clear. I felt foolish, exposed, and deeply ashamed for trusting so completely. In the days that followed, reality felt distorted. Time moved strangely. Some moments dragged endlessly, others vanished entirely. I functioned on autopilot, carrying the weight of the truth in my chest like a secret too heavy to share. I looked at him and saw a stranger wearing the face of the man I loved. Every word he spoke echoed with doubt. Every apology felt rehearsed. I no longer knew what was real. Sleep became impossible. When I closed my eyes, memories invaded. His touch, his promises, his gentle voice. They no longer brought comfort. They burned. I replayed the moment of discovery again and again, wondering how I could have missed the signs, how I could have allowed myself to be so deceived. Self-blame wrapped itself tightly around my grief, convincing me that my trust had made me complicit in my own heartbreak. Yet beneath the pain, something else began to stir. A quiet clarity emerged, sharp and undeniable. The truth, once revealed, could not be hidden again. No matter how much it hurt, it had shattered the illusion that kept me bound. I began to see that what I lost was not love, but a lie dressed as love. That realization didn't ease the pain, but it gave it meaning. The moment the truth came out, everything changed. The future I had imagined dissolved instantly, replaced by uncertainty and fear. But alongside that fear was a strange sense of awakening. The blindfold had been ripped away, leaving my eyes burning but open. I understood then that trust, once broken, does not simply heal with apologies. It demands honesty, accountability, and courage, things that had been absent all along. That day marked the end of the life I thought I was living. It shattered my trust not with a loud explosion, but with a quiet, irreversible fracture. And though I didn't yet know how I would rebuild myself from those pieces, I knew one thing with painful certainty. The truth had changed me forever, and there would be no returning to who I was before I learned it. His betrayal didn't just break my heart. It shattered my sense of safety, my self-worth, and the future I had imagined beside him. For years, I had built my life around the belief that the person I loved would protect me, honor me, and cherish the bond we shared. That belief was no longer valid. The foundation I had trusted, the life I had envisioned, collapsed beneath me in an instant. Every memory, every promise, every quiet moment of intimacy was now tinged with doubt, tainted by the knowledge that the love I felt was manipulated, calculated, and false. It was as though the walls I had built around myself, the walls that had once felt sturdy and protective, had been taken down brick by brick without my consent, leaving me raw, exposed, and vulnerable to the full force of the pain. I struggled to reconcile the man I knew with the man who had betrayed me. His voice, once soothing and familiar, now sounded hollow. His gestures of care and affection, which I had once treasured, now appeared like rehearsed performances designed to keep me blind to the truth. I replayed the moments of tenderness over and over, searching for signs I might have missed. But the clarity of betrayal cast everything into a cold, unforgiving light. The realization that his love had been a mask left me questioning not only him, but my own ability to see clearly, to trust my instincts, and to recognize sincerity. Every thought spiraled into a painful reflection. How could I have been so blind? How could someone I loved so deeply manipulate me so completely? The betrayal infiltrated every part of my life. It wasn't confined to the emotional or the relational. It seeped into my sense of identity. I began to question my worthiness, asking myself if I had somehow invited deceit through my own failures, or if I had been too naive, too trusting, too forgiving. I scrutinized my decisions, my reactions, and my judgments with a harshness I had never applied to myself before. It was a relentless cycle of self-blame intertwined with grief. Each day became a battle between anger, sorrow, and disbelief. The emotional turbulence left me feeling hollow, as though my heart had been emptied of its capacity for certainty and peace. Even the physical spaces of our life together began to feel foreign. The rooms I had once associated with comfort and intimacy became arenas of suspicion and anxiety. Objects he had touched, spaces we had shared, even the bed we had slept in, all seemed to carry the weight of deceit. The home that had once been a sanctuary became a landscape of reminders, each corner a subtle echo of what had been hidden from me. Trust, which had been implicit in every gesture and every word, was now absent, replaced by an acute awareness of manipulation and duplicity. Social interactions became complicated as well. Friends and family, who had once observed a happy partnership, now questioned the dynamics they had once admired. I found myself withdrawing from conversations, hesitant to share my truth, and wary of judgment or pity. The betrayal made intimacy with others feel precarious because it had shattered my understanding of love and loyalty at its core. The very act of trusting someone, even in the simplest ways, had become fraught with uncertainty. I realized that betrayal doesn't only affect the immediate relationship, it ripples outward, destabilizing every connection tied to that sense of safety and reliability. Emotionally, I was caught in a liminal space between mourning the love I thought existed and confronting the reality that it never did. Each memory of affection became a double-edged sword, a source of longing for what I believed in, and a wound inflicted by the truth. I felt anger simmer beneath the surface, often erupting in ways that startled even me. I was angry at him, yes, but also at myself for trusting blindly, for hoping when I should have been cautious, for allowing my heart to be so thoroughly vulnerable. That anger coexisted with grief, leaving me oscillating between moments of despair and fleeting flashes of resolve to reclaim my sense of self. The betrayal also rewrote my expectations of the future. Dreams I had nurtured, shared vacations, quiet mornings, long conversations, and the vision of growing old together were now irrevocably tainted. Each plan I had made was filtered through the knowledge that the foundation upon which it was built had been deceitful. The future became uncertain, not just practically, but emotionally. I realized that I would need to rebuild, to reconstruct a sense of trust and love that could withstand the memory of this fracture. But the path forward was unclear, obscured by the shadows of hurt and the ever-present question of whether genuine love could exist again after such profound deception. Self-worth, too, had been deeply affected. The betrayal forced me to confront the uncomfortable reality that someone I had trusted could exploit my love for their own gain. That realization left me questioning my value, my judgment, and my ability to recognize sincerity in others. For a time, I felt unworthy of genuine care, convinced that my vulnerability had made me a target rather than a recipient of true love. I struggled with the idea that being open-hearted, once a strength, had been weaponized against me. It was a bitter and disorienting lesson, one that cut deeply into the core of my identity. Even my relationship with my own emotions shifted. Pain, sorrow, and anger became constant companions, intruding into every thought and every decision. Moments of joy were clouded by suspicion, and laughter sometimes felt hollow, as if happiness were temporary and untrustworthy. I found myself retreating inward, guarding the parts of me that had been most exposed, and questioning every new gesture of kindness I received. Emotional vulnerability became a risk I was no longer willing to take lightly, because the consequences of misplaced trust had been devastatingly clear. Yet, even amid the devastation, there was a flicker of awakening. The betrayal, as shattering as it was, forced me to confront realities I had long avoided. It demanded that I look at myself, my relationship, and the choices I had made with unflinching honesty. While it tore apart my assumptions about love and safety, it also opened the possibility of growth, self-awareness, and a future built on a foundation of discernment rather than blind faith. The pain was immense, but it carried with it the seeds of transformation, an opportunity to reclaim my life, my agency, and my sense of self-worth after the profound betrayal I had endured. Ultimately, the impact of his betrayal extended far beyond the loss of trust. It shook the very pillars of my emotional existence, reshaping the way I understood love, loyalty, and vulnerability. Every aspect of my life, past, present, and future, was filtered through the lens of what had happened, making it impossible to return to the innocence and faith I had once known. The pain of betrayal became both a wound and a teacher, leaving scars that were painful but also illuminating, forcing me to confront truths about human relationships, self-respect, and the resilience of the heart in the face of unimaginable deception. I realized his care was not love, but guilt, and every tender moment carried the weight of deception. At first, it was impossible to see it clearly. Love, after years of neglect, arrived so suddenly and so convincingly that it felt real, tangible, and restorative. I clung to it because I had longed for it, because it soothed the aches that years of indifference had left in me. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. The gestures that once seemed spontaneous now felt calculated, as though each smile, each touch, each word of affection had a purpose beyond making me happy. There was an undercurrent I could not yet name, a subtle tension beneath the surface of what appeared to be caring. I began to notice that his attentiveness often came at convenient moments, times when I might have been questioning, times when my mind could wander to the past, times when I might have felt vulnerable. His care was always there to intercept doubt, to redirect my thoughts, and to prevent me from noticing cracks. It was as if he had learned to anticipate my emotions, to preempt my fears, and to meet them with gestures that calmed me long enough to obscure the truth. That realization, when it finally came, was like a sudden chill in the middle of summer. It was incongruous with what I had felt, with the warmth I had allowed myself to accept. The guilt that underpinned his actions became apparent slowly, almost painfully. He seemed compelled to show me attention, to demonstrate concern, and to create the illusion of love, not because his heart had changed, but because his conscience demanded it. Each act of care was designed to soothe not my fears alone, but to assuage his own. It was an attempt to reconcile the wrongdoing he had committed with the life we shared. The problem, of course, was that no amount of calculated kindness could erase the damage done, nor could it rewrite the years of emotional neglect and dishonesty. I began to see patterns. Affection appeared when he was guilty, absent when he felt confident in concealing his actions. Words of reassurance came when suspicion threatened to rise, and grand gestures emerged when evidence of betrayal might have been uncovered. It was a performance, subtle and precise, crafted to maintain my trust and prevent the revelation of the truth for as long as possible. I felt a mixture of anger and despair, knowing that what I had taken for love was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated act born of his desire to quiet his own conscience, not to nurture mine. This understanding changed the way I looked at our shared past. I replayed memories in my mind, revisiting moments that had felt tender or intimate. Each one now carried a different meaning. When he held me, it had not always been a sign of affection. It had been a way to feel less guilty. When he apologized or admitted fault, it had not always been genuine contrition. It had been strategic, aimed at preventing me from suspecting the truth. Each revelation eroded my previous understanding, leaving me grappling with the depth of his manipulation and the weight of the deception I had trusted as love. The realization that his care was driven by guilt also forced me to examine my own responses. I had been willing to accept the affection I received, to believe in his change, and to let myself be vulnerable again. That willingness, which had once felt brave and trusting, now seemed almost naive. I questioned my own judgment, wondering how I had been so blind, how I had ignored the subtle cues, and how I had allowed myself to be comforted by something that was never intended as comfort. The interplay between his calculated care and my trusting heart highlighted the complexity of betrayal, making it clear that deception could wear many faces, including the face of love. It became painfully obvious that guilt had shaped every interaction. When he smiled, it was not always because he was happy to see me, but because he needed to believe he was doing the right thing. When he listened attentively, it was not always out of interest or empathy, but because he feared what my suspicions might uncover. When he created moments of closeness, it was not always to deepen our bond, but to suppress my doubts long enough to maintain control over the narrative of his actions. Each act of apparent love carried the shadow of guilt, and with each passing day, the distinction between love and manipulation became clearer. The impact on me was profound. I had invested myself emotionally in a relationship that I believed was being nurtured by love, only to discover that the foundation was guilt and calculation. The warmth I had felt, the reassurance I had cherished, and the hope I had allowed myself to embrace were all tainted by the knowledge that his motives had been rooted not in genuine care, but in an effort to reconcile his own wrongdoing. That awareness brought with it a profound sense of betrayal, as well as a deep sadness for the trust I had placed in him. I also began to understand how guilt can masquerade as love so convincingly. It is subtle, patient, and persistent. It does not shout or demand attention. It works quietly, shaping behavior, influencing gestures, and steering interactions in ways that appear natural. For someone who has been longing for affection, it is easy to mistake these cues for genuine connection. I had fallen into that very trap, mistaking his attempts to soothe his own conscience for acts of true devotion. That realization left me questioning not just his motives, but the very nature of trust and the vulnerability required to give it. As the truth became undeniable, I recognized that his guilt had allowed him to construct a web of care that ultimately betrayed the sincerity of our relationship. Each act, no matter how tender it had appeared, was intertwined with the burden of his conscience. It was love in appearance only, a shadow of what genuine affection should be. The knowledge of this duality created a profound internal conflict within me. How to reconcile the relief and warmth I had once felt with the betrayal that lay beneath it. The depth of his manipulation left an imprint that would not fade easily, forcing me to navigate not only my grief, but the complexity of emotions that arise when love is entangled with guilt. The recognition that guilt, rather than love, had driven his care was both devastating and clarifying. It shattered the illusion I had clung to, forcing me to confront the reality that what I had cherished was never mine to hold. Yet, amid the heartbreak, it also offered insight. Insight into the mechanisms of deception, the ways human behavior can be distorted by conscience, and the importance of discerning genuine affection from calculated gestures. The process was painful, unrelenting, and transformative, leaving me to confront not only his betrayal, but the vulnerabilities within myself that had allowed it to take root. Facing that truth forced me to confront my pain, reclaim my strength, and see that I deserved honesty, not beautifully disguised betrayal. The moment the reality of his actions settled in, it was as if my entire world had shifted on its axis. The foundation of my trust, the bedrock of my emotional security, had been undermined, leaving me standing on shaky ground, grappling with a mixture of heartbreak, confusion, and disbelief. For so long, I had believed in the sincerity of his care, the authenticity of his affection, and the stability of our life together. Now, confronted with the truth, I realized that all of those things had been illusions, carefully constructed to mask deceit. The pain that surged through me was not just emotional, it was existential, shaking the very core of who I believed I was, who I had trusted, and what I had allowed myself to hope for. In the beginning, I felt paralyzed. The shock of betrayal weighed heavily on my chest, making it difficult to breathe, to think clearly, or to act. Every memory of tenderness, every word of reassurance, every moment of seeming closeness felt tainted. I replayed each one endlessly in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed, clues that could explain the discrepancy between the man I had believed in and the truth I now faced. The realization that he had consciously manipulated my trust and my emotions felt like a slow unraveling of my identity. I questioned not only him, but my own ability to judge character, to trust intuition, and to protect my heart. Amid the overwhelming grief, I recognized that I could no longer remain passive. The betrayal demanded action, not against him necessarily, but within myself. It forced me to confront emotions I had buried for years: disappointment, anger, sadness, and fear. I allowed myself to feel these emotions fully, acknowledging their presence without shame or denial. Pain, as I came to understand, was not only inevitable but necessary. It was the first step toward reclaiming my power, because to feel deeply was to begin disentangling my soul from the deception that had ensnared it. As I navigated the turbulent emotions, I discovered reserves of strength I hadn't realized I possessed. Strength, I learned, is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the capacity to endure heartbreak while refusing to let it define you. Each day, each moment became an exercise in resilience. I began to set boundaries, emotional, mental, and when necessary, physical. I recognized that reclaiming myself meant asserting my worth and refusing to let deceit diminish it. The act of standing up for myself, even silently, became a form of empowerment. With each boundary, each choice made in service of my own dignity, I rebuilt a part of myself that had been lost in the fog of manipulation. Honesty emerged as a principle I could no longer compromise. I understood that a relationship rooted in deceit, no matter how tenderly disguised, could never provide the security or intimacy I deserved. Accepting the truth meant committing to a life in which honesty was non-negotiable, where intentions were clear, and where transparency was valued above superficial gestures. This realization required both courage and discernment. It was tempting, at times, to seek comfort in familiar patterns, to forgive without accountability, or to pretend the betrayal had not happened. but I recognized that true healing could only occur within the framework of truth. Reclaiming my strength also meant redefining my sense of self. Betrayal often distorts self-perception, leaving one feeling inadequate or unworthy. I had to remind myself that his actions were a reflection of his character, not mine. I was deserving of love, of care, and of respect that was genuine. I spent time reflecting on my needs, my values, and my expectations, acknowledging that my previous tolerance of neglect had been shaped by years of longing and hope. By reaffirming my own worth, I began to disentangle my identity from the deception I had endured, reclaiming a sense of agency that betrayal had temporarily stolen. The process of facing the truth was neither linear nor gentle. There were days when grief felt insurmountable, when anger flared uncontrollably, and when doubt about my own judgment returned with force. Yet, each difficult day contributed to my growth. I learned to sit with discomfort, to endure uncertainty, and to act with integrity, even when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. I realized that strength is cultivated not in moments of ease, but in the persistence to rise again and again when circumstances challenge the very core of who you are. Confronting the betrayal also required a confrontation with reality itself. I had to see the relationship clearly, stripped of illusions, and acknowledge the consequences of the deception. This clarity was painful, but it was also liberating. It allowed me to make decisions that honored my dignity and my emotional well-being. I began to distinguish between gestures designed to soothe guilt and gestures born of genuine affection. I could now recognize the difference between care rooted in manipulation and care rooted in love. This awareness empowered me to redefine my relationships and to approach them with discernment rather than blind hope. Through the pain, through the heartache, I discovered the importance of self-compassion. I had trusted, I had loved, and I had been vulnerable. These were not failings, but strengths. I learned to forgive myself for the trust I had extended, understanding that vulnerability is a courageous act, even when it is met with betrayal. By treating myself with kindness and understanding, I fortified my resilience, creating a foundation that no deception could undermine. Ultimately, facing the truth became an act of reclaiming my life. It required honesty, reflection, boundaries, and a renewed commitment to my own well-being. It was not an easy path, but it was necessary. Each step toward understanding, each assertion of worth, each acknowledgement of my emotions, brought me closer to a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to demand respect and authenticity. The betrayal, though devastating, became a catalyst for awakening, a call to honor myself, to demand honesty, and to embrace the strength I had within me all along. That revelation changed my life forever, turning my heartbreak into awakening, and my silence into a voice that would never again ignore the truth. When the full weight of his betrayal finally came into focus, it was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, exposing not only his deceit, but also the vulnerabilities within myself that had allowed me to be blind. The life I had known, the version of love I had trusted, and the illusions I had held onto were irrevocably altered. Nothing felt the same. Even familiar spaces seemed foreign, and the rhythm of daily life carried a new, sharper awareness. I realized that I could no longer inhabit the comfortable, unquestioning trust I had once allowed, because that trust had been manipulated, and the cost had been far too high. The initial days after the revelation were chaotic. My emotions were raw and unpredictable, oscillating between grief, anger, disbelief, and sorrow. I replayed memories constantly, dissecting every word, every gesture, and every moment, trying to pinpoint where the illusion had begun. Moments that had once seemed tender and loving now felt like calculated performances. His apologies, his attention, his seemingly caring gestures, all of them were filtered through a lens of manipulation and guilt. The life I thought I had built alongside him had been, in part, a carefully constructed facade designed to conceal a reality I was unprepared to face. But amidst the devastation, something profound began to emerge. The heartbreak, intense and all, consuming as it was, acted as a catalyst for awakening. I started to see patterns in not only his behavior, but also in my own choices and vulnerabilities. I understood how I had allowed hope, longing, and desire for affection to cloud my judgment. I recognized how my silence, my tendency to ignore small doubts, and my willingness to forgive uncritically had created space for manipulation to thrive. This awakening was painful because it required me to confront my own complicity in trusting blindly, but it was also empowering because it illuminated the path forward. I could no longer remain passive. I had to reclaim my agency and my voice. The silence that had once defined my response, my quiet endurance, my attempts to maintain harmony despite inner turmoil, was replaced by a determination to speak and to act with clarity. I realized that remaining quiet would only allow the cycle of deception to continue, either with him or with myself. My voice, which had been muted by trust and by fear of confrontation, became a tool of self-preservation and empowerment. I began to articulate my feelings, my boundaries, and my expectations with precision and confidence, understanding that honesty, even when difficult, was a non-negotiable requirement for respect and integrity. This transformation also forced me to redefine my understanding of love and care. I recognized that love is not merely about gestures, words, or attentiveness. It is about consistency, transparency, and respect. True care cannot coexist with manipulation, and no amount of affection can compensate for betrayal. I began to examine the relationships in my life through this lens, separating those that were rooted in authenticity from those that were superficial or self-serving. The revelation had sharpened my perception, allowing me to distinguish between what is genuine and what is performative, between trust that is earned and trust that is demanded. The personal growth that emerged from this painful experience was unexpected but transformative. I discovered a resilience within myself that I had not previously acknowledged. I realized that my capacity to endure heartbreak, to confront uncomfortable truths, and to reclaim my sense of self was far greater than I had imagined. Each day became an exercise in rebuilding, not just my emotional stability, but also my understanding of my own worth. I learned that betrayal does not define me, rather, my response to it does. Choosing to confront the truth, to reclaim my voice, and to assert my boundaries became acts of courage that reinforced my identity and my autonomy. Part of this transformation involved reevaluating my relationships and the boundaries I allowed. I became more discerning about the people I let into my life and the depth of trust I extended. I understood that vulnerability, while necessary, must be accompanied by careful observation and self-respect. I cultivated an inner strength that allowed me to remain open-hearted without being naive, to offer care without compromising my dignity, and to engage with others while maintaining the standards I had established for honesty and integrity. The revelation had been painful, but it had also equipped me with the tools to navigate relationships with clarity, discernment, and confidence. Another aspect of this awakening was the reclamation of my narrative. For too long, I had allowed circumstances and other people's choices to define my experience. The betrayal had threatened to silence me, to make me a passive observer in my own life. But I chose to speak, to document my feelings, to reflect on the lessons learned, and to share my story in a way that honored my experience. My silence, once protective, became a conduit for awareness, self-expression, and empowerment. I realized that telling the truth, not only to myself but also to others, was a powerful act of reclaiming control over my life and my identity. The transformation was not instantaneous. Healing required time, reflection, and perseverance. There were days of doubt, days of sorrow, and days when the pain felt overwhelming. But each moment of struggle reinforced the understanding that I had been awakened to truths I could no longer ignore. I developed a deeper connection to my own emotions, learned to trust my instincts, and cultivated an inner resilience that would guide me through future challenges. The heartbreak that had initially threatened to consume me gradually became a teacher, revealing insights about love, trust, vulnerability, and strength that I could not have gained otherwise. Ultimately, the revelation became a turning point in my life. It altered not only my relationship with him, but also my relationship with myself. It taught me the necessity of self-respect, the importance of honesty, and the power of speaking my truth. It transformed my experience of suffering into an opportunity for growth, my grief into wisdom, and my vulnerability into strength. The awareness that emerged from betrayal reshaped the way I understood love, trust, and authenticity, leaving me more grounded, more self-aware, and more prepared to navigate the complexities of life with courage and discernment. Through this painful awakening, I came to understand that betrayal, while devastating, can also illuminate paths to empowerment. It forces the heart to confront uncomfortable truths, the mind to question assumptions, and the soul to reclaim its voice. By facing the reality of deception, I was able to transform my heartbreak into an opportunity for personal growth, to reclaim my autonomy, and to embrace a life defined not by betrayal, but by clarity, strength, and self-respect. The revelation changed everything: my perception of love, my understanding of trust, and my approach to life itself, leaving me forever altered, yet profoundly awakened.